to the launch press briefing for the Ohio River Valley Institute. We appreciate you being on the phone with us this morning. I do want to make clear that we're recording today's session. Several reporters have asked us for a link to the recorded version later on so that they can take a look at today's run of show. So just so you're clear, we will be recording this. We have got, I think, about 20 minutes of program ahead of us, and then we'll leave ample time for Q&A after that. Before we get started, I'll just run through some quick logistics. Keiko Budic, who's on the screen, will be handling the technology. So if you do run into a hiccup, please feel free to chat directly to her, and she can do the best she can to sort it out in real time. I'll be moderating today's event. So introducing the team and explaining a little bit about what we're up to, and then I'll be moderating Q&A at the end. Keiko, did I miss anything that I need to cover sort of technology-wise? It's all pretty straightforward. I think if we stay on mute, it should be relatively simple.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you can use the chat if you have questions, and you can add it in there.
Yep, sounds good. Okay, so thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Eric DePlace. I appreciate you taking the time, again, to be here. We're going to spend a few minutes today talking about the launch of the Ohio River Valley Institute. It's a new think tank built for Appalachia. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment, but I think the first question probably on everybody's mind is why this new enterprise, why a new think tank, and why this particular region? And we think there are good answers to all those questions. It is our belief that the dominant narrative in the region, from the perspective of kind of political discourse and economic discourse, has been a narrative centered on resource extraction, and too often on pollution, and that narrative has drowned out the other important voices that should be lifted up in the region and that can lead the way toward a more shared prosperity and toward a stronger economy, and frankly a healthier economy, and a place that allows everyone to flourish. So it is our belief that with a combination of good storytelling and rock solid commitment to facts and accuracy, and with a deep exploration of some of the most important issues affecting the Ohio River Valley, affecting Appalachia, affecting Western Pennsylvania, that we can begin to quiet down that narrative and begin to lift up some of the other important stories and voices from around the region and begin to mark out a path towards something more positive. My own background does not start in the Ohio Valley. My background starts in the Pacific Northwest. I've been at Sightline Institute for about 2 decades, where I have been research director and led any number of programs at Sightline Institute. And Sightline Institute is a regional think tank that works on a whole range of issues, the most pressing issues we believe in the Pacific Northwest, including things like housing affordability, transportation, economic development. And in my particular case, it's my area of focus is on climate and energy issues, and particularly confronting and understanding and helping the region understand the challenges posed by large-scale development of extractive industries and fossil fuel industries. And so my belief is that the success that Sightline has seen over the years can be replicated and adapted to a very different region. I wanted to say welcome real quickly to the new person who's just joined us and let them know that we are recording this show so that you're aware. Thanks for joining us. And I'll continue with my remarks, which is to say that this story is not ultimately about me, and it's not about Sightline Institute. This story is about a different region with different needs and different talent. And it is my strong belief that all across the region, there is a tremendous array of talent and a tremendous array of important voices and expertise that should be center stage today. And so that's what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the folks who will be joining me with the Ohio River Valley Institute as we embark on this new enterprise. I will play a role in support and across the constellation of talent in the region. I think that the Ohio River Valley Institute has managed to land some of the brightest stars. And in particular, I will introduce our executive director, Joanne Kilgauer, who has a robust and successful career as a community activist, as an attorney, and in my opinion, as a visionary. someone who is really at the right point to help bring this region into the next chapter and into the next stage. And I think she's got everything we need to launch this institute. I'm very excited to introduce the rest of the team in a moment. But for now, our leader, Joanne Kilgauer.
Thank you so much, Eric, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It's really an honor for me to present this new organization here this morning. The Ohio River Valley Institute is a resource for marking out a positive economic vision for the greater Ohio Valley region that exemplifies and amplifies the community-based values and rich culture of this region and helps move us toward shared prosperity and a more equitable democracy. My understanding of our society really changed when I visited a mother of two, Stephanie, at her recently finished dream home in Washington County, Pennsylvania. A dream home that had since become a nightmare because she couldn't let her kids play outside before checking a windsock they kept on the lawn to indicate whether or not they'd be breathing in fumes from the wastewater impoundment just yards away. Over the course of my career, I've been humbled by what people in the region have given to me. I've been welcomed into the homes of clients who kindly served me coffee made with bottled water because their wells had been compromised by the then new fracking industry. I've been gifted homegrown fruit that persevered despite being grown adjacent to coal ash disposal areas that blew a thick black dust over all of the adjoining properties. And I've shaken hands with retired mine workers as we stood in the cold, demanding that the benefits they earned, putting their bodies on the line to line the pockets of their corporate bosses, be returned to them. What I know to be true about the greater Ohio Valley region is that the depth of character, work ethic, and commitment to community here is unparalleled. This is what motivates me to work with the Ohio River Valley Institute in the hope that I can give something back to a region that has so deeply enriched my own life. Today, we have the opportunity to work through the Institute and demonstrate that a real economic prosperity is only possible when accompanied by a revitalization of the democratic processes that bring communities into the policymaking process. We have an obligation to put the fossil fuel industry on notice that their outsized political and economic power, which has limited long-term development and eroded our democratic institutions, can no longer control the narrative for this region or dictate our public policy. The policies enacted over the last decade are dictating the health, safety, and prosperity of our communities today. And likewise, it will be the work we do over the decade to come that will shape the future of our society. We can see this with the impacts of COVID. We see it in the long overdue reckoning with racial justice, and we see it in hundreds of other areas in our lives. The choices that we made and the policies we adopted over decades created the reality that we're now living in. That will be true in the future too. The choices we make now, the policies we enact over the next decade will determine the future. That's why the opportunity we have with the Ohio River Valley Institute is so exciting. We're bringing together a roster of expert advisors who we encourage you to read about on our website, and they have spent their careers researching the foundations of a strong society. We're working with community leaders to understand how new research can bolster their work and how their work can inform our research. And we're engaging in data-driven analysis to shape policies that will cultivate shared prosperity and a more equitable democracy for the entire region. To that end, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce one of this region's leading lights, Ted Bettner, who's dedicated his career to crafting policies that support communities in West Virginia and will now apply his expertise toward the creation of policies that can yield shared prosperity throughout the entire valley. Thank you, Ted, and I will leave it to you.
Everybody for being here. I just want to say I'm very proud to be part of this new and exciting organization. For about the last 15 years, I've worked with communities, policymakers, and other stakeholders in West Virginia using research and analysis to pass and advance policies that improve the well-being of people in the Mountain State. Whether it was raising wages or expanding healthcare coverage or improving the long-term fiscal health of West Virginia, the importance of sound evidence-based research, I think, can play a vital role in improving the lives of people especially those that are left out of the public process. All too often, so many people don't have the political power or the know-how in some ways to engage in that process, and we can provide a really critical link into that. As Joanne talked about too, the Ohio River Valley faces many economic challenges, including a lack of investment in our people and our communities, and an economic development strategy that is centered on fossil fuel extraction. For far too long, the region has been overly dependent on a boom and bust economy that has failed to deliver a shared prosperity or provide a foundation for a diversified and sustainable economy that benefits everyone. West Virginia is a really good case study in watching this transpire. And while we can't change the past, we can build a brighter future, one that includes living wages, better health, more inclusivity, and an opportunity to be a place where children want to stay and raise a family. This means that it will be imperative to get ahead of the curve by recognizing where the new energy economy is going and adapting to building a stronger economic future. Because it doesn't matter whether it's 1 year or 5 years from now, the chances are that federal action on climate change will happen. And it will take all of us working together to ensure that the region is at the table instead of on the menu. Much like several decades before, our region is at the crossroads, much like it was in the late 70s when deindustrialization began and our factories and coal mines began to shutter. That's why it's so imperative that we learn from that past and take the steps needed today so that we not only benefit from the clean energy transition, but we also become leaders in that transition. Because if we want to build a sustainable 21st economy, it's going to require embracing the region's rich natural assets. It's going to require repairing the damage from the past. It's going to require a focus on expanding in-state businesses instead of chasing smokestacks, as we often do, and also investing in our communities to make sure that we have a transition to a clean energy economy. So I've been involved in just public policy and working with policy for over 15 years. And we've often let the centrality of our fossil fuel industries dictate what kind of public policy and what kind of economy that we want to have. And to that end, what happens is we just end up being worse off than before. And some of the promises never transpire, never trickles down to the working families of the state. So we hope to be able to provide that research and analysis and to chart a new path forward where more people benefit and our communities benefit and don't have to sacrifice themselves without having clean drinking water, with having a polluted environment, that we can do this. And it's so important that right now at this pivotal point that we embark on that, because if we don't, we're going to be worse off in the future. So to this end, I'd like to introduce Sean O'Leary. He's my fellow senior researcher at Orvie and a policy wonk like me. Sean brings a world of knowledge related to energy and economic issues, and Sean is a fellow West Virginian from Wheeling, West Virginia. Sean, do you want to take it away?
There. I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, thank you, Ted. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really very grateful to have this opportunity, not just to talk to you, but to be part of Orvie and what we're about to do. Because as Ted just mentioned, I'm from Wheeling. I was born, grew up there, and I'm old enough that I can say that I was born at a time in the mid-1950s when Wheeling and the Ohio Valley at large were still near their economic zenith in terms of population, economic activity, and prosperity. And so that means that I've spent, the better part of the last 6 decades having to watch the area decline economically and in terms of population. And for the longest time, the forces, the global forces that were causing that decline, the fortunes of the steel industry in particular, but also the coal industry, those were forces that were so big that local and state policymakers, frankly, had few tools at their disposal to do a great deal about it, particularly in an area whose economy was not terribly diversified to begin with. But I think it's really become the most painful watching what has happened just in the last 10 years or so. And that dates back to the dawn of what we now know as the fracking boom, the natural gas boom. Because, starting back about 2008, 2009, policymakers in the region started hanging hopes on the natural gas boom as what many of them called an economic game changer, a phrase that's become so commonplace it's almost hard to listen to anymore. And of course, what happened is that, the natural gas boom did in fact take place. I can go back and remember, and I think it was 2011, West Virginia's governor, then Earl Ray Tomlin, delivering his first State of the State address and talking about how West Virginia faced a future of unlimited job growth and prosperity. And that was specifically attributed to the natural gas boom. Well, in fact, what has happened is that the growth has happened. Natural gas did boom. We're pumping more gas now as a region than was even anticipated in the most optimistic studies of the time. But what has not happened is the accompanying growth in jobs and prosperity that was predicted to accompany that growth in production. And what's really difficult for me is that failure, that disconnect, was, if you go back, even transparently obvious at the time. We chose not to see it because there were economic forces that made it plain that the production of more fossil fuel from the region was not going to lead to a build out of other industries or the creation of other jobs. And so today, for instance, in Belmont County, Ohio, which produces a third of all the natural gas produced in the state of Ohio, which has received a third, many billions of dollars of investment associated with the fracking boom, that county has fewer employed people today than it had in 2008 at the beginning of the fracking boom. And that is true, by the way, of the leading fracking counties in all three states. Collectively, they have actually seen a net decline in employment, while the three states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, have seen an expansion. And so they've actually become economic drags on their states. And that sadly is I think, the accomplished fact of the fracking boom at this point. And so we have to look for something else. And lately, that something else has been the idea that there will be a huge build out in the petrochemical industry. The petrochemical boom has become the shale revolution, as some call it, has become the new purported economic game changer. But what worries me is that just as 10 years ago, we could look at the economics surrounding the natural gas industry and see that it would not lead to the kinds of job growth and prosperity that was being predicted at the time. Frankly and sadly, the same can be said of the petrochemical or the purported petrochemical boom that's coming. To the degree that it happens, it is exceedingly unlikely to lead to major downstream job growth in other industries, while it will, at that same time, impose significant costs on the region and on communities. And in that respect, probably the only significant difference between the petrochemical boom and the fracking boom is that whereas the fracking boom actually took place, there was a huge spike in production. Frankly, the economics suggests that the petrochemical boom will not actually be realized in the way the fracking boom was. There will not be a major build out in the way that some people are predicting and hoping for. And when I say some people, I'm making specific reference to recent reports that have been issued by the US Department of Energy, by the American Chemistry Council, and by various natural gas related groups within the Marcellus Utica region. And so we're faced with a situation where right now, all three states, under both Democratic and Republican governors, have largely tied their economic development strategies to this petrochemical boom that is not likely to happen, and to the degree that it does, isn't likely to deliver the jobs and prosperity that's been predicted or hoped for. And so the question, the challenge is, what else can we do? And I think for me, the reason there's hope and the reason that I value the opportunity that ORVI is affording us is that, like many people of my generation, I had to leave West Virginia, to look for work and to build a career. I've gotten to live in three places that have prospered economically. The first, after going to Columbus, like everyone else does from West Virginia. I went to Washington, D.C. for quite a few years. I raised my kids in New England in the Boston area, and most recently I've lived in the Northwest. And one of the common denominators of those regions, particularly New England and especially the Northwest, is they're regions that have embraced the emerging clean energy economy. And what's interesting is that when you go back 10, 15 years, we had the same kind of arguments then in that region that are being held right now in the Ohio Valley and Western Pennsylvania. There are people associated with industry and policymakers who are saying this is an issue of jobs versus the environment. They're saying that there's a necessary conflict between having clean air, clean water, and stopping carbon emissions, and on the other hand, having jobs and prosperity. What the experiences I've had in New England, but especially in the Northwest, have shown is, as Eric said at the top of this little show, is that good environmental policy is great economic policy, because what has happened is exactly the opposite of what critics predicted. They said that we would see the loss of jobs. They said that we would see electric rates going through the ceiling, that people would have to pay more. And in fact, exactly the opposite has happened. In New England, in the Northwest, the clean energy economy is the fastest growing sector of fast growing economies. It has become an economic boon to be here. And one of the opportunities that I look forward to at ORVI is taking some of the policy lessons that we've learned and see how they can be applied in the Ohio Valley and Western Pennsylvania, because we actually have a great many latent resources that can be built upon. And I would point specifically to the area of energy efficiency. Right now, when you look at the clean energy economy, energy efficiency represents about 3/4 of all the jobs in that sector. And we're talking about jobs in businesses that we know and understand and that already exist in our communities. Things like heating, ventilating, and air conditioning contractors, lighting contractors, home remodelers, and other firms that are already firmly established. And in the Northwest, what we've seen is that rather than going out and, to use a phrase that Ted used a moment ago, chasing smokestacks, what we've seen is, as a result of investments in things like clean energy and energy efficiency, is that it stimulates organic growth from businesses and within communities that already exist. And that makes the economic stimulus widespread rather than concentrated in any one place where you might get a new factory or a new plant of some sort. And so, I look forward to being able to, or having the opportunity to, adapt some of those lessons, because we have, as I said, a great many resources in this area that are capable of supporting things like wind power and solar panel, but also energy efficiency measures that can have a triple benefit. One, they can feed economic renewal and stimulate real job growth in the region. Secondly, they can help people reduce their costs for electricity, because one of the great ironies of the natural gas boom in the region is natural gas is credited with bringing down electric costs all over the country. But the great irony is the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia have their power costs going up faster than the country as a whole, even though we're the source of much of the electricity. And that has everything to do with policy choices. We can do something about that. And when we bring down costs for energy, we also put more disposable income in people's pockets and help stimulate the economy further. And so I look forward to working at Orby to help bring those lessons to bear, to help bring the strategies that are already working in other parts of the country to bear. And I just can't wait to get started. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And Eric, I'll throw it back to you.
Sean, thank you so much, and Ted, thank you, and Joanne, thank you. Once again, I'm so delighted to be with this team as we embark on what I think is an exciting new enterprise for the region. We'll do some Q&A right now. We are recording the show as a reminder for some other reporters who weren't able to make it today at this hour. But at this point, we can take questions either by using the chat function or by using the raise your hand function. We can unmute you and you can ask your question to the group. I've also put in the Institute's website in the chat function in case that's useful to folks at this juncture.
I'm going to just unmute folks.
And I've got one question that came in just to me. And the question is, what makes you think that a think tank can reverse the tide of economic difficulties in the region over the last 10 or 20 years? And I think, Joanne, why don't you take a crack at answering that question? What makes us think that a think tank has the capacity to do something that big?
Sure. Well, first of all, I can say that, you know, we believe that certainly we're not going to do it alone, and that we really view the Ohio River Valley Institute as almost like a prism through which so much of the great work that's happening in the region and so much of the expert thinking that's happening in academia and in the public sector can be condensed and repackaged and brought together in different ways that will really allow us to aggregate and amplify and present the story of the region in a way that there just have not been resources to do so far. And so I think that's how I would frame that, is that it's obviously a huge endeavor, and you know, we certainly don't want to pretend like there isn't a lot of wonderful work that has been happening and will continue to happen to move this region toward ends that are just and in the public interest and building shared prosperity. And we view the Ohio River Valley Institute as one lever in the toolbox of building this infrastructure that can really help to add value in a space that hasn't had this resource to date.
Thanks, Joanne, and I'll let others chime in a little bit, but we have a question from Brittany Patterson in the chat now. Can you talk a little bit about the type of concrete actions that we hope to undertake as a think tank? I would be happy to, maybe I'll start the question and then let some others chime in. You know, the Ohio River Valley Institute is by design pointed at what we think are some of the biggest challenges for the region. So we are not, there are many issues that deserve attention. We think we're going to be poised to make a difference with some of the hardest ones. So we're not setting ourselves an easy task, but our focus initially will be in 4 areas. The first area is thinking about the energy economy, which has sort of 2 sides to the coin. There's an extractive energy industry, which I think most people are well familiar with, as well as an emerging clean energy economy that Sean talked about. We're also going to think really hard about the possibility for economic renewal and for shared prosperity across the region, trying to figure out what the tools are that can help grow the region. We'll be thinking about democracy and civic inclusion, and really studying carefully the ways in which many people have been excluded from power and excluded from civic engagement. And we'll be thinking about strategic communications too. That is the way that people use language and stories that reflect their values, and that shape the way that they see the world and interact in the world. Because it's my strong belief that understanding the values and the language that people use is critically important to thinking about policy. And having said that, I will pause to let some other folks in the team provide some examples of the kind of the concrete work that we'll do in the region. Maybe Ted would be poised to start off this answer, since he's done so much work already in West Virginia on really similar issues and can point to a track record of success, working in the Mountain State.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is a very challenging region, and this region's also served as a sacrifice zone for so much natural fossil fuel extraction that has fueled the economies outside of it. We've been very dependent on volatile energy prices and exterior demand for this development. And we've had a lot of growth, as Sean has talked about, but we haven't had the development side. So that's a very important distinction to make. Is having those two. But in terms of concrete policies, I mean, I can rattle off a couple, but I mean, I think one that's a great opportunity. We have wonderful, rich natural assets in the area. We have beautiful communities that could, very much make a difference by just restoring the damage and repairing the damage of the past. So just to give you two examples too. We have billions of dollars, approximately $6 billion just of mining damage within the region of the 4 states. We have approximately probably several billions of dollars in abandoned gas wells, orphaned wells that need to be addressed. These can be huge job creation policies that not only provide a living wage to the people that work and can stay in their communities, but it also provides a firm foundation to pursue more sustainable economic development in the region. Because we can talk about, trying to encourage entrepreneurship and small business development, but if people don't have clean drinking water, have good schools, have good of a quality of life in those areas, it's very difficult to create that economic engine that Sean talked about. So it's slightly about reorienting those things and repairing some of the damages of the past. And I think it's important too that that the economy works for us, that it's not just us working for it. So that means looking at those possibilities at the federal level as well, because as I was noting earlier, I think it's pretty clear no matter what happens that there will be some federal action on climate change, maybe not this year, maybe 5 years down the road, but it's imperative that this region is in a place to help ensure that those policies benefit this area. So that's just one example of things that we can do. And there's lots of things we can do at the local level, municipal level, to help transition to a clean energy economy. But just one of those really concrete ways that we can do that is repairing the damage of the past and addressing those legacy costs so we can have a firm foundation for economic growth.
That's great. And thanks. It looks like we've got 2 more questions. The first one I think is it looks like 3 more questions now. Let's see. I want to make sure I get these right. Okay, so I assume this one is best handled by Sean, because the question is, what makes you so confident that the petrochemical build out in Belmont County and in other places around the region is not likely to happen? Why do you think that it will not be like the fracking boom, which, as you say, actually did happen?
I'm sorry, I was prompted to unmute, excuse me. No, thanks very much. The petrochemical boom, not just in Belmont County, but throughout the region, is facing a lot of economic headwinds that the natural gas boom was not facing. And I will refer you to the website where you can see a couple of blog posts that address this in greater detail. And I'd also refer you to a recent letter to the governors that I helped organize with a group of economists that received fairly wide news coverage, which cited specific reasons that the build out is unlikely to happen. The first of those is that the profitability of the operating margins for ethane crackers, which are the centerpiece of a petrochemical build out. They're the piece without which the downstream plastics manufacturing build out that people have talked about won't happen. And they're also the piece without which the Appalachian Storage Hub, which has received a lot of press, won't happen. The problem is that the economics for crackers have been deteriorating for the last couple of years and are getting even worse at this point. And the reasons for that are that there's been a massive build out of competition in the Gulf Coast region of the country, and there's an even greater build out of competitive capacity going on in China right now. And for that reason, we've of course seen that crackers that have been proposed in the greater Ohio Valley, one in Wood County, West Virginia, one in Monroe County, Ohio, have both been canceled. The PTTGC cracker, of course, that's proposed for Belmont County has been delayed on at least 4 occasions right now, and we're waiting to see if there will be a final investment decision either at the end of this year or early next year. And of course, recently, ExxonMobil was rumored to have been looking for a site for a cracker, but even that has fallen off the radar screen. And so when you consider that right now there's only one project, the Shell cracker in Monaca, Pennsylvania, that's being developed, there is only that one major project of the purported petrochemical build out that has been green-lighted at this point. And the decision to do that was taken more than 4 years ago. There has not been another major proposal green-lighted since then. And so I think not only do the coming economics look daunting with respect to a build out, but even when we go back over the past 4 years, we've seen that there simply has been no major development activity in the region. So, looking at that, and when I say we, I'm referring to that group of 8 economists with whom I worked on the letter, we came to the consensus conclusion that no, the build out simply is not likely to take place on anything like the scale that's been talked about. And for reference, you can look at the American Chemistry Council study from 2018, which most people who promote the industry refer to. And in that study, they talked about the construction of 5 crackers, 2 dehydrogenation plants, and the construction of about 500 miles worth of pipeline in the region, virtually none of which is underway apart from the Shell cracker that was approved 4 years ago. So that combination of factors is what seems to make it exceedingly unlikely that the build out will be on anything like the scale that was predicted. And then downstream of that, it also appears that even to the degree that the build out takes place, we've already seen in the American Chemistry Council study and in DOE reports that more than 90% of the product that's generated from the crackers is likely to be shipped out of the region. In other words, it won't go into the development of new production, new manufacturing capabilities here. And to the degree that it does, it will largely merely replace supplies that are currently sourced from the Gulf Coast. And as a replacement resource, that means that even the small portion of production that stays in the region is not going to be used for the creation of new jobs. It will merely help sustain jobs that already exist. And in that respect, it looks a whole lot like the natural gas build out, which had very much the same effect.
Thanks, Sean. I think that's a great answer. And Brittany, it sounds like you've got another question. We're going to unmute you this time, so you can ask it yourself. Keiko, can you unmute Brittany? Or,
Hey
she did her.
guys,
Okay, got it.
you can hear me?
Hi.
Okay. Thanks for holding this call and thanks for taking my question. So I'm Brittany Patterson. I am the Energy and Environment Reporter for West Virginia Public Broadcasting and the Ohio Valley Resource. And so one thing that we have been thinking about recently is this idea of a just transition and the ways in which this topic is now really being put front and central in the Democrats' sort of climate platform. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about how you see that playing here in the Ohio Valley region and Appalachia, and if there are gaps to what we're seeing being put forward from the Democrats as far as making that a reality here, because, you know, up until very recently, I think it was rare to hear those words truly even uttered in the state house. And this session in the West Virginia legislature, you know, we had a bipartisan bill didn't go anywhere, but we did, that dealt with this idea of just transition. So I feel like there has been some shifting, but I'm curious, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts here, and also if there are sort of gaps in what's being proposed. Thanks.
I think that's a super question, and I'm not sure Joanne or Ted, I would guess, are probably the best poised to answer this one.
Maybe we'll both take it. Ted, I'll start and then I'll pass it off to you for more detail. But, you know, I can just say that one of the things that I think is really critical is understanding the regional nuances to the conversation. So, you know, I think with any kind of federal proposal, there's a tendency to try to apply the same policy or the same principle, the same rhetoric to each region throughout the country. But it's very clear to me that the needs of workers and working families in the Ohio River Valley is very different from the needs of workers and working families in other parts of the country. And so having some real public discourse and really engaging with community members to understand what those nuances are and what the needs are feels almost more important to me than rushing ahead with a particular federal proposal. There's a lot of excellent work that's been done by coalitions throughout the region, and I think some deep engagement with the longstanding work and some reflection on some of the efforts that have been tried and haven't come to fruition seems like a necessary step. So from my perspective, you know, thinking about really doing that deep level of community engagement, even though there might be a tendency to sort of capitalize on this political moment, is still really critical to make sure that we get policies that are going to be effective and that are going to take into account the specific needs of our region. And Ted, I'll leave it to you to add anything more specific about what gaps you see or what you think has inhibited these kind of policies from moving forward in the past.
Needs to unmute.
Ted, you're on mute.
I knew somebody was going to do that at some point. Yeah, sorry. Brittany, are you referring to the bill that to create the Just Transition Office in West Virginia?
Yeah, and sort of, you know, I seeing that bill was kind of a sea change and from what maybe we'd seen in the past. And so I'm, you know, seeing that step forward, seeing all of the groups that have in recent sort of months even put out plans that have really capitalized on this idea and tried to move it forward. And I'm just wondering sort of how that plays into what we're seeing on a federal platform level from the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are really good questions. I mean, I will say up front that very few areas of this country and this world have successfully had a robust transition from specifically coal mining. You can point to some parts in France, actually, but it's very limited. There are places, there are programs that have happened in the past. In the Redwoods in the Northwest was a really big one in the late 70s, early 80s. also tobacco settlements. I mean, there's different federal programs, and doing it at the state level, I believe, is actually going to be easier than we think it is, because when you go through the people that are working in the mining sector, and you actually look at the ages and look where people are and how much money it would actually take to have a very robust transition, it's actually not, it's pretty affordable. In West Virginia, my guess, to have a really robust program would be in the $100 to $200 million range, perhaps per year, and getting smaller and smaller. So it's very doable in terms of, we in West Virginia cut taxes by over $500 million a year over the past decade. So the money's there. It's just a question of priority. But I've been at this game for a while too. And I remember, we did a report back in 2011 saying that coal's declining, and, it took 8 or 9 years for people to accept that. And this was something that was nothing controversial that we were saying, other than the Energy Information Administration, the federal government was predicting coal is declining, and we ought to prepare for it. And we've seen what's happened too, that we didn't do that, right? We didn't make that prep for that period. And, I think we reap the consequences of that. And having this conversation, I do think like businesses are now beginning to say, like, we don't really feel like locating in West Virginia unless you have renewable energy, because we've had a mandate to do that. And you're seeing states like Virginia say, we're going to go to zero electricity emissions by 2045, 2050. We're seeing other states embrace that. In fact, about a third of the country is now under a mandate to go to zero net emissions by 2050. And that's just really important for a state like West Virginia to keep in mind, because whether we like it or not in this state, other places are embracing this change. And it's going to have a dramatic impact, not just on coal mining areas, but also in the fossil fuel industry sectors. And unlike states like Alaska, even Wyoming, we don't have any assets to show for it. We don't have a trust fund with $68 billion in it like Alaska, which was another thing we tried to implement here, was a future fund to have some type of financial resources available to invest in that transition. But I think it's going to happen whether we want it to happen or not, especially in the coal arena. I do think there are federal policies, and most likely to have a really sustainable and good transition, which can, for some folks seem like can be a very difficult conversation. It will take federal action. And one of the good news is that, West Virginia's U.S. Senator Manchin is on the Natural Resources Committee, an energy committee, to play a pivotal role in making that happen too. But there have to be people on the ground, putting together those policies. And I think the missing link, Brittany, is that in order for this area to have a quote just transition, people from West Virginia have to be at that table, and people from this whole region have to be part of that public policy process. And we're seeing that with the National Economic Transition Platform that recently came out. And we're seeing that with another effort called Reimagine Appalachia, that they're putting out a platform. And I hope that those efforts will build that support and continue to carry that conversation forward. But you're absolutely right. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy conversation to have. Coal mining is as much part of West Virginia's culture as it is our economy. And, but, as Robert C. Byrd said right before his death, it's important that we embrace that future. Because if we don't, we're going to be worse off.
Thanks, Ted. And it sounds like Sean wanted to reply real quickly, and then I do want to get to Nick's question, which I think is an important one and one of my favorite questions, actually.
Yeah, Brittany, this is Sean. And I just wanted to mention as a specific example, I mentioned in my earlier comments that, my views have been somewhat informed by the experience that I've had in other parts of the country. One of those has been the case of a town called Centralia, Washington. And Centralia, Washington is a town of about 15,000 people that historically had two principal employers, a coal mine and a coal-fired power plant. The coal mine is now closed. The coal-fired power plant is in the process of being closed. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is that for the last 4 years, I've been working at an organization called the Northwest Energy Coalition, which is a policy shop based in Seattle. And I think one of the most productive things that we did was helped arrange a transition plan for Centralia, which includes $55 million in transition funding from the operator of the coal-fired power plant there. And that money has been, for the last 3 years, already started to flow into the community. And you can actually go online and see videos of what's happening in Centralia, whose population, since the announcement of the coal closure, of the coal-fired power plant closure, has actually increased. And at the same time, Centralia is now becoming the site of what will be the largest solar generating facility in the state of Washington. And so that's one of the, I suppose, specific examples I would cite where I've gotten to witness and work on policies that have actually helped real communities make the kind of transition that Ted was talking about. So it is possible.
Thanks for adding that, Sean. I'll read Nick's question, which I think he put in chat to everyone. Successfully transitioning the region to a clean energy economy would first require surmounting the political power of the fossil fuel industry. How do you unwind this industry? Are there examples from around the country or around the world that have pulled this off that you will look to? And this is a topic, thanks for asking that question, Nick, that, I would be delighted to go on about at some length. It's one of my favorite topics, but I think there are examples from all over the country. Certainly the Pacific Northwest has some notable examples that I played a role in, and that was sort of arresting the growth of coal terminals and the oil industry, and of gas pipelines and some petrochemical facilities as well. It is one of the lessons that I have learned is that there are a lot of people in a lot of places that can feel isolated from one another and can feel that they are too small and too powerless to stand up to the might of what is perceived to be a giant. In some cases, it is a real giant, but it's my strong belief that through connecting communities and bringing important resources to bear that can support those community efforts, that there are lots and lots of examples, not just from the Northwest, but from around the whole country, where people begin to see and believe the truth of the matter, which is that we don't have to accept the future that the fossil fuel industry has written for us. This is not just a story of community activists or a story of think tanks or anything like that. We are also in an environment where the sort of ocean currents and the tides of technology and of the markets are on our side. The clean energy economy is coming our way. That's happening. You can, all over the country. It's happening in fits and starts in some places. It's happening with great speed in other places. One of the best indicators is the market performance of some of these companies over the last many years. Obviously, the coal industry story is well known, but I think what's less well known is the collapse in oil and gas markets that was happening in 2019, well before the coronavirus arrived. And since the coronavirus has arrived, many of those companies, the super majors, as we call them in the oil industry, have lost 70% of their market value, or more in some cases. So their political power is eroding from under their feet right now, and really the currents and the tides of progress are moving toward a clean energy economy. The question that we have to confront is, how do we do it with a speed that honors climate science, and how do we do it in a way that's fair and lifts up and supports communities, so that we're not stranding whole regions and whole communities in a way that is potentially deeply unfair. And that's the challenge I think that we really have in front of us in West Virginia, and that Sean pointed to in Centralia as being a really positive example. I see that we're running really close to the end of our time. I wanted to thank folks for being on the call this morning, both the Ohio River Valley Institute team and to the reporters who joined us. We will be sharing this video with some others who've expressed interest. And unless others have any closing remarks, I will allow us all to say goodbye at this point. And again, thanks for joining us. We're really excited to be launching this new endeavor.